But I mean, it never really heals. It's just one of those things you learn to live with. It's like kind of like a scar, and it heals, or like a muscle. Like if you're working out, it tears and it becomes.
Welcome to the Raw and Real podcast. Are you dreaming of changing your life through opening a business, or are you curious what obstacles entrepreneurs had to overcome on their journey? Then you're in the right place. My name is Agnes Pillik, and I'm your host. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Raw and Real. Today's guest on the show is Roman Prokopchuk. He's a first-generation immigrant from the Ukraine to the United States. Since 2008, he started working in digital marketing. In 2012, he decided to start his own company in this field, and next to it, he's a host of the Digital Savage Experience podcast, one of the top 100 shows on Apple Podcasts. Hey, Roman, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So, Roman, you immigrated from the Ukraine to the United States at the age of 5. What were your biggest difficulties you were confronted with as a kid growing up in a different country?
Yeah, I mean, so kind of the journey, I'll go back a little bit. It was still the Soviet Union. So I came here in 1990, and the process to get here, I had to go through Vienna, Austria, and then Rome, Italy, and then come here. So I didn't know really why we were leaving, or where we were going. And when I got here, I think the main barrier for me being 5 years old was the language. So going to school at first, I had to take what's called English second language classes, so additional kind of schooling to learn the language and be proficient and communicate with the teachers and the kids around me. So that was kind of the really main thing, I guess. My parents, my grandparents, my aunt, who I came with. So it was 6 other family members. We came to a 2-bedroom apartment. My grandparents were already retired, so everybody had to work. So, everybody was working. I had to kind of, pick up the slack as a 5-year-old, learn as much as I could on my own. And, my mom worked while we were in school, but still, she had a busy schedule as well. So I think the main barrier for a 5-year-old was the language itself.
Were there also any cultural differences that you were confronted with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we got assimilated right away. When we got here, we kind of got into a community that had a Ukrainian church. So it was, the services were in Ukrainian. Other people spoke Ukrainian. Outside of that, over English. So I think like my grandparents and my parents and my aunt didn't assimilate as fast as I did because I had to when I was in school. So that was kind of, I guess, the main thing. And there are a lot of Eastern Europeans in the U.S. I think in Sacramento, in California, it's kind of the biggest population. I think it's like 60,000 or something, crazy like that. But other than that, I think that was kind of, the cultural, side of things. And I think there's people that want to help you kind of succeed and have you rise with them. And then there's other people that get to success by holding, people down.
Yeah.
So I think those were some of the things my parents faced. I remember, they could have bypassed certain things in terms of getting pointers for certain laws or, certain different things in terms of like starting a business, when other people weren't as, helpful or genuine about it. So I think there was issues like that to try to like kind of hold you down. Like, you just got here, you shouldn't be more successful than me. So those are some of the things that I do remember from that time.
And then your initial plan was to go into criminal justice. And that didn't work out because of the recession in 2008. So can you tell us a little bit about the moment when you decided to start your own company in digital marketing?
Yeah, even before that, like a little side note, I was actually, even before the criminal justice, I was going to go to the military to officer candidate school. So if you graduated college here with a bachelor's degree and you wanted to go to the Marine Corps, you went to, officer training in Quantico, Virginia. And when you completed it, you would get a commission as a second lieutenant officer. So I was going to do that before even graduating. But when I was going to go away, I didn't know I had a ulcer that was caused by a bacteria called H. pylori. And I had it for years and didn't do anything about it. So I had like internal bleeding, all kinds of stuff. So I couldn't do the pre-ship physical fitness test. When I had to do to get there and do it, I was like throwing up blood and whatever.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of stopped me doing that. And if I did go, most likely the doctor said I would have probably died from that, from like all the, physical activity.
Yeah.
And then when I, kind of stopped that, I got better. I never really went back to that. The economy tanked. Before I uh, graduated, I had an internship with the Secret Service, like you said, on the counterfeit currency squad. I saw that kind of lifestyle was a little hectic. So in terms of the Secret Service, you have to move every few years and change a different post. And if you have a director that doesn't like you, they will send you to like Alaska or like Minnesota when there's nobody there except like grizzly bears and polar bears, and you don't have a choice. So in terms of thinking long term, like starting a family and stuff, that was one of the things that kind of dissuaded me. But I started applying to other criminal, justice things and law enforcement agencies. But that's when the economy, crashed.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into it. I just out of luck and kind of ran with it. My friend presented me the opportunity. I, went to the gym with this person and he said, come outside. I want to give you something. It was, a packet about search engine optimization. And that's what I started in terms of digital marketing. And I worked for a company called LexisNexis for 3.5 years after that. And then I decided to start my company because I saw other people that had the same level of experience as me, some less, going to different other agencies, getting director, vice president roles and stuff like that, and other people going freelance and doing things, both also kind of hustling on the side and then doing things. So that's basically how I initially started. So I still had, director roles in different positions at other agencies, but at the same time, kind of 9 to 5 was that. And then like 6 to 12 was me, managing a team, handling kind of operations and stuff like that. So kind of balancing those and having 2 income streams.
So you started out part-time. And what were, in the beginning, what was your expectation like? And what was reality in the end? So can you maybe give us a couple of examples of things that didn't go completely as you expected?
Yeah, I guess I started it in my 20s. So in my 20s, I was more so like, chase more like money, material things, titles. So I expected to, have a bunch of contracts, a lot of clients, all this money coming in, which I did have different partnerships with other agencies and, started getting business. But then I started learning things like getting screwed over by people that, you trust in terms of, you have somebody that works for you that's remote and has to build a website that, you're responsible for the client. And then they just disappear and then you're out, thousands of dollars out of pocket, finding somebody else or, reimbursing the money. So
Without
situations where,
communication.
yeah, just kind of like ghosting, basically, just disappearing, no contact, no anything, like nothing happened. Um, I mean, there's been a lot of instances like that, just like people, I guess, taking advantage of, me being helpful or me wanting to be genuine and help people and giving people the benefit of the doubt or kind of trusting people straight, to begin with. Because a lot of people, I mean, even before in 2020 have, ulterior motives. I mean, even on social, people, contact you, hey, how are you? I saw you're doing so-and-so. And then you say, oh, awesome, that's cool. And then they try to pitch you some kind of, course or, I have
For
100
sure.
qualified leads for you. And it's just like not genuine. So just like finding genuine people that have the same mindset and the same goals as you and kind of surrounding yourself with, I guess, the right elements.
And because you mentioned that you would expect to have more clients in the beginning, how did you get your first clients?
Well, basically, what I did at other agencies, my body of work. So, I mean, in digital marketing, you're only as good as, your results and what you've done for clients and campaigns and the kind of clients you worked with and, different testimonials you got. So I built a decent relationship where I already had, a few hundred campaigns in different roles, strategist, specialist in a management role, a director role, tactics, account management. So people already knew my capabilities. So a lot of people, when they went to start their own companies, that was in their expertise. So they would come to me and they would say, I have this project that I'm scoping. what would you charge if you were to do this? This is a year contract. And a lot of the first things were in that sense that way. So I would, quote another person that, I've met or networked with, I want, $5,000 a month, and this is what you would be getting. This is the amount of work. These are the people they got to work on it. And if that worked for the overall project, and then they quoted their client, it was like the client pays that agency and that agency pays me and my agency.
Yeah.
That was kind of the first. And then it really moved into, I've done a lot where people know what my expertise and what my agency's expertise is, and they may have weaknesses in that. So they, ask me or people that, I manage to come in and audit their process. So for one agency, I went in there on site, I negotiated a rate to do so. And for about a month, I was working in their offices, basically going through their whole client list and what they did right, what they didn't do right, what they should be doing, and kind of retraining their staff in terms of, best practices and how they can better fulfill campaigns. So I think it moved from that direct thing to me in terms of a consulting component as well.
Yeah. All right. And then you started getting into podcasting at some point. So what was for you the main driver behind getting into that business?
Well, I always like the concept. I think it's a superior medium. It's the only thing where people say, I can multitask. Well, it's the only thing you can really consume that audio and do something else. So if you think about it, you can't really drive and watch them. I mean, you can, but you may crash or not be as observant. But, driving or having a commute to work and still pay attention to the road or being conscious of the stuff going on around you, you can listen to a show, whatever genre. So I think it's a superior medium to reach your target audience. And I think I wanted to do so probably like 6 or 7 years ago, but it was one of those things I put off. I think I put it off far too long. And I think like the drive there was like, it's not going to be perfect. People aren't going to like it. And if you listen to episode 1, it's like the sound quality is like horrible. It's all over the place. And about last March, I switched over to an interview format. A month before, my grandfather passed away from having several strokes. And I think switching over to an interview format really helped as a coping mechanism to kind of deal with that tragedy. And I actually like that format because I like talking to people more and learning more about them and, indirectly networking with them over than just having, just dialogue, me as the only person on the show. So up until then, I had that as the format. But since last March, I interviewed about 140 people on my show and kind of figured out what makes them tick. So what they've been through, how they got to where they are now, what motivates them, things they turn around in terms of weaknesses into strengths, and hopefully at some point create kind of a community out of that. So everybody that's been on the show can network with each other on some kind of platform, and also maybe put together all those findings, like takeaways from each episode, and, write some kind of ebook, book about it, that kind of thing, and tie it into my life experiences.
And because you interviewed so many people, are there certain patterns that you recognize? Something that comes to mind?
Well, basically, it's dependent on where they are in their life. So if somebody is in their 20s, one motivation may be a little different, but the path may still be similar. So somebody may still have the same goal at 20 as they do at 80 in terms of achieving something, starting something. But what motivates them and what kind of holds them back is a little different, all situational, and the variables they've been, dealt, and how they handle different stresses or different things that, arise. If you're 18, 19, you may have not dealt with loss, different other things. When you're, 35, 40, I think the key there is emotional empathy and emotional IQ. So you develop that over time and you work better with people, understand where people are coming from, and kind of have a better understanding of who you are and what your strengths are as well.
And before, you also mentioned that you already wanted to start a podcast for a really long time, but you actually really did it 1.5 years ago. So what was the main driver that really pushed you to go for it, even though you would know that it wouldn't be perfect?
Yeah, well, I thought the technical aspect would hold me back. So the editing audio, I have a background in digital marketing. So like social media promotion and promotion via, digital channels isn't, something I struggle with, but just getting guests, getting a structure, kind of getting the automation components of it, scheduling, following up, different content things. And I think just like the technical aspect, I thought it would be a lot more technical in terms of like what your host is and things like that. Then when I saw it wasn't that hard, actually, what helped me is joining a bunch of groups on Facebook. So like podcast movement, different like podcast support groups, and those communities are really great in terms of answering questions and having a lot of great assets that you can access in terms of kind of how to's and step by step things. And I think, I mean, it's going on, 2 years or whatever, and it's still a learning process. So, I take constructive feedback all the time. One of which is like 50-50 because I think I'm the only podcast that really has like a background uh, music for the whole show, kind of
Yeah,
a
I haven't
tone.
heard many of them besides
Yeah.
yours.
So it's been 50-50. Like it makes people remember, oh, that's a show with that kind of like the acoustics in the back, but it also had people that it distracts them from the message. And I can see both points of view. So at some point, I may change that and then see the result. I mean, if people are listening more,
Yeah.
listening through more, yes, that's a great change. So I'm not, stuck or like offended if somebody gives me constructive feedback. Actually, I've gotten, that several times. Somebody on Facebook actually messaged me like, I reviewed your podcast and this is like, you could really go to the next level if you like remove the background because it really like took away from my audio experience. And that's cool because it's figuring out and seeing different demographics say the same thing. So that person was like a 40-year-old male. I've had, 20, 30, 40-year-old, females say the same thing. So that proves a certain point for me to then test. So learning from that, learning in terms of improving processes. I'm currently like back end wise, I'm on a free host. I may move to, like Libsyn or something like that in terms of a host. I think the only people that really care about that are other podcasters. The listener doesn't know where you're hosted. They just hear the
Totally.
audio on Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeart, wherever your native website. So I think it's just like one of those things that you're constantly improving, and just the interview process and how I talk to people. I think my format is like listening people the whole expressing themselves and not interrupting. I've been on a lot of shows where it's just like interruption, interruption, interruption. And that's the person's style. It may work for the audience, but I think developing my own kind of style over time. And I think everyone has their own style in terms of uh, being on shows and how they, react and how they answer things. And also in terms of being a host. So,
Yeah, I agree. So what do you think is the biggest challenge as a podcaster?
right now, just the situation is good and bad, the whole, pandemic. So, last month I did about 18 interviews on my show. So right now I have 43 interviews in queue. So releasing 2 a week, I may have to start releasing 3 a week to kind of deliver more to the audience and pace them out a little bit better, because right now I have like 5 months of content.
Wow.
So, some people have seen like their downloads and plays go down because it's a podcast that people listen to on their commutes, that kind of thing. And now they're working from home. So their general behavior has changed. They may be watching more Netflix or TV in that time, or just, hanging out, doing whatever. But I think in that sense, it's been good and bad. I mean, the podcast has reached the highest. It was number 48 in the US in how to. I think it was top 200 in education at one point. I mean, it is a vanity metric because you get there, it's not a stationary point. You stay there for X amount of time unless you're getting hundreds of thousands of downloads a month, then, you're getting legitimate reviews and constant plays. You do fluctuate if you're an independent podcast. So I guess the goal is to get to, the top 200, top 100 of, my category and basically stay there. And at some point that should happen, but as kind of the share of, voice for Apple Podcasts gets eaten up by other platforms, it may not be as important. Because right now in the US, Apple Podcasts still hold about, I believe, like 65% market share. I think the closest, second is Spotify at like 15 or something. And then everything else is just small percentages. So it's still important as a platform, but that may change.
You reached over 100,000 downloads. So one of the biggest questions is always, how do you grow your audience? So what is your experience there and what worked really well for you?
Well, it depends the format of your show. I feel like a lot of shows that get a lot of good traction are like true crime and stuff like that. They get a crazy audience just because like just the content itself. In terms of like interview formats, I guess it depends what category you're in, but you do have the luxury of, your guests helping you promote that to their communities. A lot of people say, don't depend on it. I don't depend on it, but I make it as easy as possible for the guests to share it. So when the episode does go live, I send a go live kit with all the links and all the social media assets that then they can share as they see fit. And I don't force them. I tell them if you like to, you can. In my experience, the smaller guests have more loyal communities than the larger ones. I've had people with, million, 2 million, like genuine followers, let's say on Instagram, but that didn't really translate much into, subscriptions or downloads or plays. Where I've had people where they have a smaller community, I usually put the episode on YouTube too, and it gets, 800 plays, which is decent if you throw it on YouTube because that's not the main consumption point for my podcast. So situations like that, and if they do share, then they refer it or they refer other people in terms of guests and have kind of like a piggyback effect. Also helping each other get on shows that we've been on, so kind of networking in that way. I have had guests where, they come back to me, I was on these 4 shows, you seem like a good fit in terms of your story. And then obviously I've been on a fair amount of shows in the last year and a half. And, I add value that way. If there's any shows that, they've seen me on, I'm more than happy to get them on. And it's just like this, indirect adding value. I never asked for it to begin with, but it's just like naturally happening. I think actually Miha connected us. He's actually referred and I referred him to a lot of stuff. So it's been like really co-beneficial. And his interview on my show was really great. It added a lot of value to the audience as well.
And do you have any tips for people that want to get on many shows?
Yeah. So you have to have a strategy. If you don't have somebody like a virtual assistant, you're going to have to like allot time to really do outreach and have a good pitch. So have a message, what you're about, what you're offering to the audience, and not be generic. Don't copy and paste and email each show the same exact thing. I would recommend creating, or if you have, a service or somebody at your disposal to create you a media kit to really make, what you can speak on, the things been through. I think when I created a media kit, it was a lot easier and faster to get booked. Sometimes when I reach out to a show, they may get back to me 2-3 weeks. When I, created a media kit, they can really see the value I can add to their audience. I link to a bunch of other media appearances I've had, other shows speaking to see like my, style of speaking, what I, add to the audience. And I think that sped up the process and it just kind of knowing who you want to reach. And I don't think just because you think a show is really big or really out there, you shouldn't be dissuaded from at least trying to get on or seeing if you can add value. So if you want like a strategy, I would look at the genre you're trying to reach, or the audience, because the main thing is kind of piggybacking off the audience of that show but adding value, not going in there like super fake and just the whole interview, just pushing a product or service. Or, I've had people where I ask a question and they're like, well, it all started when I created this product. That's not what I asked. How did you get to that point? So having the mindset of going and just adding value and just being, yourself and talking about your experience and what you've, learned, your struggles and what you think resonates with that audience. So really understanding the audience, ask questions when you do pitch, what is the audience like? Usually a lot of shows have a press kit where it breaks down the demographics of the shows, like downloads, stuff like that. And basically figuring out how you can position your message to that audience as well. Because the way you communicate it may resonate differently from show to show as well. Sometimes you have an hour to get your thought out. Sometimes you have 10 minutes. So figuring out, the structure and how you can deliver that. And then just being persistent. I devote personally about an hour to 2 hours a week to basically vet other shows, reach out to other people that have been on, stay connected, and then kind of pitch a few shows a week. And I try to do at least like 5 to 6 interviews a month. January, I did 10. So my goal for 2020 was 40. So hopefully I get to like 60 or so. And it's just, I mean, it's interesting for me before this whole coronavirus thing. I worked from home and remotely. So it, breaks up my day. I get to talk to people. I get to network with people. People get to pick my brain from, the things I've been through and my experiences. So I think it's just being persistent and having kind of a plan and formalizing the process and documenting everything, because I have, spreadsheets and Google Docs for everything when I contact people, contact information, when I've done different interviews so I can follow up. A lot of shows don't necessarily tell me when the episode goes live that I've been on, because I try to promote every show I've been on through all my channels and stuff like that. So I think it's just being persistent, and you will get people that don't respond. But I mean, eventually, like, you have to position your message. And I think everyone has a story to tell and can add value to at least, a handful of particular shows.
And in terms of promotional activities, are there any things that you do besides benefiting from your guests' audience?
Yep. Social, I think, is the go-to. I think it's very saturated at this point. You see a lot of people in terms of audiograms and that structure on Instagram. I started using kind of TikTok and the TikTok community to drive traffic as a whole new audience. My audience is kind of mainly male, 25 to 44 right now. And I've been kind of pushing it to get a little bit more diverse in terms of, that male and female split, because I do have a lot of guests that are females. I think the last 3 that have launched were all females. And I try to kind of add diversity that way, different ethnicities, different walks of life, men and women. So I think figuring out that as well is kind of important.
And in what way did the podcast influence your marketing business?
I've been getting an influx of leads, like genuine leads from those activities. Obviously, my market, I try to focus on clients in the U.S. or at least headquartered in the U.S. So, I mean, at other agencies and stuff like that, I worked with Fortune 500s, but obviously most Fortune 500s have a presence in major markets. So they have a marketing team and a U.S. side. So figuring out that as well. And I think also adding value. I haven't done it as much as I would like to, but because I'm building a dedicated site for the podcast to get every episode kind of backtracking, having a blog post for every episode with in-depth kind of content about the guest, different things of that nature. So having a branded site in that sense, but then building out a page on my company site and then adding each episode as a blog post on my site, which is a lot of work, but it does add in terms of search engine optimization and that organic search traffic. And a lot of stuff has been word of mouth. A lot of stuff in groups. I actually went in August of 2019 to Podcast Movement in Orlando, Florida. That was like a great conference where I networked a lot. I had a lot of guests from that, and I got on a lot of shows from that. I actually participated in this kind of speed networking where I was one of the shows, and you had like 20 guests, and like they pitch you. They have like 3 minutes to pitch you, and they rotate. Mm-hmm. So that kind of developed a lot of stuff and a lot of like kind of the after hours relationship building. So I think going to events, networking, and figuring out who the target audience is. I think initially you start out with kind of friends and family, and oftentimes like friends and family don't necessarily want to listen, like, what are you doing? So sometimes that growth is slow, but it doesn't mean it's going to be like that over time.
And what's the main way for you to get guests besides conferences?
At this point, since I've had so many and people have seen that my show has gotten into like the top 100 in the US and other English speaking markets, I have a lot of booking agencies reach out to me. I go and look at guests on different sites like podcastguest.com. There's another one called Podit, different communities where they have, professional profiles of who the guest is and what value they can add. And I've had a lot of other podcasters that I've developed relationships with that it makes sense to go on each other's shows in terms of adding value. So I've had that as well. So if you do have a podcast, you have the luxury of, having that as something that you can offer another podcaster if, you know, you don't necessarily contact somebody if you just started like, entrepreneur on fire. Hey, can we swap interviews? Because that's not an equal, kind
Yeah,
of distribution. It's like one of those things, I'm giving you $1, give me $1 million. But if you find people that are like in the same place, the same amount of episodes, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same amount of downloads and plays, but if they have a loyal audience or just in general, like it's always great to network, and you never know what can come out of it.
totally. And do you have any tips for podcasters who are maybe starting out also in terms of SEO, because you mentioned it before?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need a site, like a dedicated site. You could obviously have wherever you're hosting as kind of your hub, and then that obviously gets syndicated to all the top, platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, Pandora, stuff like that. But if you do have the option, buying your domain name, so you kind of defend that. If it's something super catchy and super generic, I would buy it because somebody else is going to think of the same thing or a variation of it. And then you can't really do much unless you copyright it. And then if you do copyright it, depending where you are in the world, you have to go to court, and it's just this like back and forth. But I think first establishing what the goal of the podcast is. Is it, a brand play? Is it you're going to use it to, eventually market, sell products or services, advertising space? You have to figure out what's your goal. I think a lot of people I see online get into it. It's like, when can I start monetizing? I want to make money right now. That shouldn't be your goal. It should be a platform to add value and build an audience, and then obviously create a loyal audience in terms of what you're giving them for basically free. And then eventually, you may have sponsors, you may have ads, you may have different products that get placed that are aligned if that's kind of your goal. But I think figuring out what your goal is, and if it's a brand play, if it's like you as the host to amplify yourself, if it's something related to your business and it's connected to your business, you may want the podcast on your company site. If, you just want to brand a specific community, you may want, a dedicated site for that. So I think defining your goal first, but I would definitely recommend some form of website, because then that content is powerful, because then you have another traffic source in terms of people finding it from, organic search and doing searches and, search engine results pages.
And last time we talked, you mentioned that last year has been one of the hardest that you had to go through in your life. Can you tell us a little bit what happened there?
Yeah. So last year, so me and my wife had, in the last 3 years, me and my wife have had 5 miscarriages, 2 of which were on, Christmas days, which kind of cast a negative connotation. Now, if it's Christmas, you automatically think of that happening. Last February, like I mentioned, my grandfather passed away. He had several strokes, and, he had to be taken off life support, and he was unable to, breathe without the respirator. And he was basically at that point kind of brain dead. So dealing with that, my wife's actually my mother-in-law got sick out of nowhere. She was in the hospital, and then she got some kind of infection, bacterial infection that affected her heart. So now her heart function is at like 20%. She has this like vest, and it's like this whole crazy thing. My wife's grandfather, actually passed away as well. And it's just, from the personal sense, it was just one thing after the other. So, I mean, I would say from that experience, I wouldn't necessarily, like, if you're being truly successful, I would, brace yourself for things happening, because a lot of the time in life, one thing happens and then just kind of snowballs out of control. So one thing happens, 2 things happen. And then how do you actually react to that? Do you kind of shut down? Do you, feel sorry for yourself, or do you kind of move past it? The whole thing with my grandfather before then, so I know we spoke about outside of this that I'm also a foster parent. So, he said, I'm proud of you. You've had, 20 kids in your home. Well, at that point, it wasn't 20 yet, but you're taking care and being a father figure to all these kids. I'm proud of you for that. I'm proud of you of like everything you're doing. In terms of professionally, he found it amusing that, I'm making, good money working remotely, because he worked traditionally like in factories and stuff. He's like, how are you working from home making this money? You just get out of bed, whatever. And he was like proud of me for that. So obviously I went through the grieving process after that loss. But thinking about it, do I kind of shut down and move away from what my goals were, or do I go and work even harder because that's what he wanted me to do, and basically honoring him in terms of like where I go and what I do in life. So I think that's one of those things, like everybody before you, I think it's important to think about that there were people that sacrificed a lot of stuff in your life, family and friends, to kind of build who you are. And I think it's important when you're kind of down or, want to quit something that you may be close to succeeding, that, it would honor them if you kept going, and it would be
Yeah.
kind of the best way of showing them and, keeping their memory alive in terms of trying the best that you could do in something.
And because you also mentioned that you're a foster parent. So I can imagine that it's really hard emotionally to take in a kid for a while and be the parent. And then after a while, you have to give it back. So how do you cope with that? And how does it also personally influence you?
Yeah, so we became licensed foster parents May 31st, 2018. June 1st, we got our first placement. We initially wanted one child, a baby, and we're technically designated foster to adopt. So if we have a child with us and the parents lose parental rights permanently, they get terminated, they come to us first and, see if, the situation, are you willing to adopt a child? So first situation, we had two boys. They were moved from another home because the foster parent said she couldn't handle them. And basically, we were told to begin with, you're going to be able to adopt them. This looks like, the mom's going to lose parental rights. So fast forward, we had them for a year. We already kind of developed this relationship, having a child for a year. And especially one was, 16 months and one was turning 3. So it was like a large portion of their lives. And we did everything with them, went to Disney World all over the country,
Yeah.
every weekend, every time we can do something. And then we found out that, they're going to be going back to the mom. So like that first thing kind of destroyed us emotionally. And I think we were kind of like not naive, but, fresh to the situation. So we didn't know like what we would feel or how attached we would get. And we took like a month break. We went to a family reunion in Hawaii for 2 weeks, and then we started kind of going. So our shortest placement has been a day, and the longest has been a year. And even if it's a day, it's still hard. You see
Wow.
these kids coming with situations harder than most adults. Like they've seen things that a lot of adults haven't. They've experienced abuse, neglect, not being fed. And we've had kids that have come that are like 2 years old, black and blue eyes, bloody nose. My wife had to take them to the hospital, and the hospital makes us aware that, 1.5-year-old was there 6 months ago because he had a fractured skull, like crazy stuff like that. And I think it's a lot different than a biological child because you're raising it, what the child, is thinking kind of, you're bringing them up in terms of your values. And you get a child and you have to figure out what makes them tick, how you can help them, how you can be, an emotional support, things that they're afraid of. So, sometimes if they were abused with like burned or whatever, they're afraid, like if there's a bonfire, they like lose their mind. Or if they were like drowned or held underwater and like bath time or taking a shower is hard or anything else. Sometimes they haven't been fed. So they just like need to eat all the time or just like eat to the point where they're about to like throw up. So it's like figuring out their existing situation and being as best of a support to that. And it is very challenging. Right now we have 4 kids and we're in like quarantine for the last 3 weeks. So it's kind of crazy because they're all under, they're 6-year-old, a 4.5-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and a 2-year-old, all boys. So they're just like, whenever they're up, they're just like terrors destroying everything. And it's, not necessarily advisable that you go around the neighborhood or walk around by other people right now. So we have to find activities to keep them busy and things like that. But, every child, like I said, if we had them for a day or a year, I mean, it's still, challenging emotionally.
And because you mentioned that every kid obviously comes from a different background and you have to figure out in a way what they went through. So how has that also personally changed you from a personal perspective and also from an entrepreneurial perspective?
Yeah. It's like entrepreneur and business. It basically makes me not focus on the things that aren't important. So if there's an email that can wait, or if somebody, is, saying things or, work isn't getting done or something that you can get like super stressed about, like at the end of the day, certain things are less important now and can wait and can be resolved, I guess, in the future, or taking a little time out to kind of like breathe and give some time so it's not like an emotional response, because a lot of business situations or business decisions are made out of emotion, and sometimes they're not necessarily the best. And personally, I think that in terms of patience and just showing me what my life is, and to be more appreciative of more of my situations, because there's 1, 2, 3 year olds. I think the oldest child we had was 9. They're coming from situations that are horrible, impoverished, and a lot of the time, like, the system is broken, so they're oftentimes going back to the same situation. So it's just like one of those things where, like, what have you really been through, and is it really of importance?
Hmm.
So I try to say, like, things that are like first world problems or third world problems. So, like, going to Starbucks and then forgetting whipped cream and you getting upset about it. So that's a first world problem. Like, you need to, like, take it back sometimes. And it's hard to do in, our society, fast paced societies around the world, where, focus is on, like, a lot of the time, me, my goals, my goals, my goals, but, like, taking a step back and, like, really appreciating things around you. And, the situations, you may be in a bad situation, but if you think about it, most situations could be a lot worse. And there's a lot of people that, wish to be in your shoes.
And when it comes to that emotional attachment and that emotional connection you develop with a kid, like how did you really learn to let go after a while?
I don't think I have. I mean, I still, the first 2 kids, I mean, I can't, I look at pictures, I get emotional about it. Me and my wife actually, when they left, created a email account and then a dummy kind of blind copy account where we email them, like, as we're talking to them, every day, or we try to every day. Now it's a little less frequent, based on if I was doing it every day, I would just be like emotional out of my mind half of the day after I write this email. It's just like my mind is in that place. But I mean, it never really heals. It's just one of those things you learn to live with. It's like kind of like a scar, and it heals, or like a muscle. Like, if you're working out, it tears and it becomes stronger. But that tear happened. It'll always be there. But I mean, you have to kind of just deal with it and live with it. I mean, you shouldn't, I guess, put those feelings away, but kind of cope with them and understand that oftentimes you can't control situations.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. And do you still have a last key takeaway for us, like a personal insight that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, with everything going on in the world, I think people are kind of worried about their situations and stuck at home. But it's just like one of those things. You're stuck at home, but most people are stuck with, like, all of their comforts. If this was 20, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have different means to talk to people. I mean, last weekend I had like a game night with like 20 people over Zoom. You know what I mean? And some family members and friends I talked to more than when people were seeing each other in person. So in a way, it's bringing people in the world a little closer. And people were scared about the economic situation, but I think, like, do what you can control and take advantage of the time. So you have all this extra time. Don't just sit and binge on Netflix. I mean, you can. I'm not dissuading people, but if you really had goals before this is a great time to take advantage of it, and maybe even pivot from what you've been doing, build a business out of it. I know out of the 2008 recession, I believe there was like 12 main unicorn companies that started billion-dollar companies within that recession. So there'll be people that are taking advantage of it, and if you're one of those people, you can position yourself for whatever the world will look like when we get out of this.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And how can people get in touch with you?
Yep. I mean, if you Google my name, Roman Prokopchuk, I mean, it's a tough last name, but I usually show up first out of all the Roman Prokopchuks in the world. So you can find me on almost every social media platform. My company website is novazora.com or novazoradigital.com, and my podcast, like you said, is the Digital Savage Experience. If you search for that, you can just listen, leave feedback, whatever you want. And if you have any questions about foster care, or immigrating to the US, or digital marketing, I'm always happy to answer any direct messages or emails I get. usually obviously free of charge and just trying to add as much value as I can.
Thank you so much for sharing. And for everyone who's watching or listening, if there's anything that stood out for you today, or there was something you could really connect to, please make sure to share it on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're active, and tag me and Roman in it so we can really see it. And it also helps me to ask better questions for you in the future. Thank you. See you next time.